Welcome back to another edition of On the Line. I am your resident accountant and host, Samira Moyedin. We are on day 612 of Israel's slow drip genocide. A lot of stuff going on this week. We've got the UN conference where we may see France and the UK talk about recognizing the state of Palestine. And tomorrow marks the 1-year deadline that the International Criminal Court had given to Israel to bugger off out of the occupied West Bank. It looks like that directive, like hundreds of other resolutions, will just fall by the wayside. Yesterday, we saw the Israeli army aboard the Madlin Gaza Freedom Flotilla and kidnap 12 of the humanitarians on board, including Greta Thunberg. There were also journalists on board and a parliamentarian, Rima Hassan, also on board. They are now being held incommunicado. No word from those 12. No communication whatsoever. We are also seeing unprecedented protests happening on the streets of the United States against the actions of ICE, mainly in Los Angeles, but also in parts of New York City. And so within all of that, coming up is my conversation with Sarah Leah Whitson. Trust me, you don't want to miss this conversation. Stay tuned. Sarah Leah Whitson, thank you so much for joining me on the line. I want to start with you at the Madlin. This is the Gaza Freedom Flotilla. As we all watched last night, Israel board the vessel. We haven't heard from the people who were on board for more than 12 hours now. I just want to get your thoughts as you were watching this unfold late last night. What were you thinking?
Well, I was thinking that the inevitable was about to happen, that the Israelis would use military force to block the vessel and continue their efforts to block humanitarian aid. So obviously it's extremely disappointing, but I think that the ship has served its purpose of drawing a spotlight on Israel's excessive, extraordinary efforts to stop humanitarian aid from reaching Gaza. And, in addition to it being a unlawful act and clearly a war crime to serve as an obstacle to humanitarian aid, it's just such a vicious and cruel act. And Israel just keeps showing that face to the world. So they may have scored a point against those who are seeking to bring aid to Gaza, but I think they continue to lose a lot in their global image. I mean, they are a pariah state, and every time they do something ridiculous like this, they emphasize to the world just what a pariah state they are. I think there's a political significance to this, particularly in the prior attack on the Gaza humanitarian aid ship that wasn't able to leave and was attacked, I believe, off the shores of Malta. It is basically Israel saying that they will extend their military power not just through the Middle East to stop their perceived nemesis and foes, but that they will carry out targeted military attacks in Europe to target and silence their perceived foes, in this case, humanitarian aid workers. So it's also a very dangerous signal to the extent that the Europeans have stood by and said nothing and done nothing. And there's, I think, some suspicion that the government of Malta permitted the Israelis to carry out the drone strikes on the prior aid flotilla. It should be frightening to everyone in Europe that their governments have now given Israel license to attack them, even in their own territory or far outside the jurisdiction of Israel. So therefore, I think it's also important that this time Israel waited till the boat, the Medellin, was much closer to Gaza. I don't know exactly in what territorial waters it was. That could be because they made that same calculation, that European states said, hey, that's a step too far off our turf. But, I think there's a lot more dysfunction behind the scenes between Israel and Europe right now than meets the eye.
And I want to get to that sort of dereliction of duty, and you mentioned the European countries and maybe Malta having a hand in allowing Israel to do that. This morning, 400 of Canada's leading human rights experts, including 3 of our former ambassadors to the United Nations, penned a letter to Prime Minister Mark Carney. I just want to read a little bit of it to you. It says in part, waiting, vacillating, remaining silent, and failing or worse, refusing to act in the face of mounting and incontrovertible evidence of genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity can no longer be options for Canada. As the director of Dawn, I'm sure you're constantly in communication with world leaders, advocating for action. I just want to get an idea of what Canada's report card is in your mind in response to this genocide.
F, B minus. I mean, they're not alone in having these failing scores, and that is the cover that states are hiding behind. Well, we're all failing, well, what can we do? This kind of duck and cover. No state wants to go out alone, certainly not a Western state. And no state wants to incur the wrath of Israel and its supporter, the United States. The United States has made clear that they will seek recrimination and punishment against governments that try to take Israel on. And I think that this whole South Africa story with supporting white Afrikaners who now want their own separate state in South Africa and received quite a bit of rhetorical support from President Trump is directly in retaliation for South Africa's bringing the case at the ICJ for genocide. We haven't seen the shoe drop in terms of U.S. actions on Spain and Ireland, who've been the most proactive in terms of trying to do their part for the genocide in Gaza, but it's grossly inadequate. This conference that's being held in New York City later this week under the auspices of the UN resolution to enforce the International Court of Justice's opinion that Israel's occupation is illegal and is a form of apartheid, and that Israel must end it, but more importantly, that member states have a legal obligation to take action to end their support and assistance for the state of Israel, to bring occupation and apartheid to an end, and in the words of the court, as rapidly as possible. So that will be an opportunity. And of course, we heard some murmurs that France and the UK were thinking of doing the extremely brave thing of recognizing the state of Palestine, which I believe over 130 countries have done. But now that apparently is off the table. So I think that there's a lot of momentum, and I think that governments around the world have more public support and backing to solve the problem of Israel than certainly anything we've seen in recent decades. And that is a direct attribution of the price that Palestinians have paid with their blood, with their lives, with their limbs, with their eyes, that the world is paying attention. And again, Israel makes its pariah face clear every day when, as it did yesterday in attacking this humanitarian aid ship. So there is momentum. There is a possibility for states to act. Will they act? That remains to be seen. We are issuing a series of recommendations to the UN conference that's happening this week. We, want to support it as much as possible. There's a General Assembly resolution that's also coming imminently within the next day or two about the situation in Palestine. Unfortunately, it's very weakly worded, which doesn't bode well for the upcoming conference. But there is momentum. And I think one of the important reasons to take on Israel now is not just about Israel, is not just about Palestine. it's about sort of reaffirming globally that we are not going to allow the entire planet to devolve into the law of the jungle, which is where the Trump administration and Israel are taking us. Because if we cannot force the United States to uphold international law with respect to its ally Israel, if the entire world has to submit to the U.S. Israeli diktat, that does not bode well for anybody else on any other issue anywhere else in the world. So this is an important place to draw the line, to say, hang on, where we draw the line is genocide. Where we draw the line with massive popular backing from our own populations, from our own publics, where literally it's the entire world versus Israel and the Trump administration, not even the American people. This is an opportunity for them to say, hang on here. No, you're not going to take and exterminate Palestine, and you're not going to take Canada, and you're not going to take Greenland, and you're not going to take the Panama Canal, and all of the other threats that Trump came out dangling, which are all tactics of intimidation, pressure, and silence. And as anybody should understand, if you give a fraction of an inch to a bully, he will stampede all over you. And Columbia University may have learned its lesson now, too late. Paul Weiss may have learned its lesson now, too late. You cannot give in even a fraction of a quarter of an inch to these bullies, to this tyrannical bullies.
You mentioned that more than 130. The number is 147 now. Member states recognizing the state of Palestine. In the letter that I pointed to from the Canadians here, that was one of their 5 demands, that the Canada recognize the state of Palestine. Because over here, our leaders constantly say things like, we're committed to a 2-state solution, but then they refuse to recognize the other state as part of that solution. So it's a bit Janus-faced, these statements that they're making. And tomorrow is actually the anniversary of the ICC saying that Israel has 1 year to pull out of the occupied West Bank, that it is an apartheid state, and it needs to end the illegal occupation. But I want to come to this. In March of this year, your organization, Dawn, asked the ICC to investigate former President Joe Biden for, quote, aiding and abetting genocide. What is happening with that request?
Well, the court has no practice of responding to communications with the court, as ours was. Submissions to the court seeking the prosecution of additional war criminals. What happens, we hope, is that the prosecutor's office will closely examine the evidence we've submitted, which is at the level of fact and detail of a formal legal complaint. It wasn't just, hey, look into this. This is a 200-page document that provides the legal and factual basis for prosecuting these Biden administration officials, President Biden, Secretary of State Blinken, Secretary of Defense Austin, and 9 other Biden administration officials whom we do suggest that they look into without ourselves providing all the evidence about their wrongdoing. But certainly the court has full legal basis, in our view, to indict and arrest these U.S. officials for aiding and abetting and facilitating the crimes that we are seeing in Gaza. And we certainly hope that they will act, but this should be a sword of Damocles hanging over their head until their dying days. And of course, Biden may be closer to those dying days than was revealed to us when he still thought he was going to be a presidential candidate, no doubt in an extensive magnitude of lies that were told to the American people. So it can happen at any time. The indictment and arrest warrant against Philippines President Duterte happened, over a decade, I believe, more than 2 decades after his crimes. There is no statute of limitations on these crimes. And if it's one thing we're seeing from everything that's happening in the world today, there is a lot less stability than you can count on. And the fact that there is a possibility for these Americans to be indicted for the good of the court, for the good of humanity, is, I hope, an important contribution that will serve as a warning sign to others. I hope it's not so much of a warning sign that it bolsters American efforts to destroy the ICC, which I think is also a very, very real possibility. And that is the tension that the court faces right now, which is if they do seek to indict these former U.S. officials, it will increase the ire of the American government, the Congress against the court, and give them more excuse to go after the court. But if they don't indict and prosecute, certainly the Israelis who have been responsible for the genocide in Gaza, but also the Americans who've been aiding and abetting, the court will lose credibility and member states will start to drop out, because you cannot sustain the credibility of a court that only ever prosecutes Black Africans, which is, what we've seen.
Yeah. You touched briefly on this in the previous your previous answer, where you talked about this sort of collapse of the international rules-based order, and we can't allow that because we're actually seeing that, and the level of hypocrisy in these institutions is really troubling. But I just, because you're also a lawyer, you're not just the executive director of Dawn, you also have a legal background. What do you see in terms of how these institutions can still do their jobs? Like, how do you recover these institutions with the onslaught of abuse that has happened in the past 19 months?
For one thing, the United States has a long history of disregarding and disrespecting the International Court of Justice. So the International Court of Justice is the court that hears complaints between states. States bring actions there, and that's why South Africa invoked the universal jurisdiction of the Genocide Convention to bring the case against Israel, in a very, very bold move that I hope that South Africa continues to be commended for. But the United States has previously ignored orders of the court, and it does so at the peril of America's standing. So it's not necessarily something new. It is the first time, I think, that in a case of genocide, the ICJ's provisional measures have been ignored, and member states have not taken action to enforce it. So if Palestine loses, if the Palestinian people lose because of the failure of the international community of member states to uphold the orders of the International Court of Justice, then every state in the world loses, because they will lose a tool that they have used to enforce their claims against other states. I mean, over territorial water issues, over maritime issues, over border issues, over trade issues. There's so many things that the International Court of Justice hears, and that won't be a tool for them. So everyone will lose. Similarly with the ICC, the United States has always opposed the ICC, always served to obstruct the ICC, except when they perceive the ICC to be going after its nemesis. And most recently, of course, with the Ukraine prosecution, the U.S. Congress remarkably passed a provision in law saying that they would assist the ICC in the prosecution of Russia. They would provide material support. They would gather evidence that they've gathered to submit to the ICC. All things that now could potentially find Americans who've provided assistance to the ICC in trouble for, in terms of the sanctions that have been imposed on the prosecutor and a number of judges there. These are the edifice of international justice and international legal accountability, the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court. If the United States and Israel want to burn them down because they are going after Israel, then that is an attack on everybody in the international community, because everybody loses that tool. Everybody loses that protection. And, I think it's important to see Israel's actions and America's actions as just that. They will set the world on fire before they allow themselves to be held accountable, before they are forced to stop their genocide. I mean, that is the mentality of the current Israeli government. I hope that the Israeli people, as they find themselves increasingly isolated, as they find themselves increasingly unable to travel to various parts of the world because of the risk that they may be caught up in a complaint against them under various countries with universal jurisdiction laws for what they've done in Gaza, decide that that's not how they want to live in the world, that's not who they want to be, and reject this government and transition into something different. I'd love to talk about that at some point because that is the subject of my book with Michael Omerman that comes out in September with UC Press.
What is the focus of the book? So it's about sort of Israel moving beyond this pariah state, or
basically it's called From Apartheid to Democracy, a blueprint for peace in Israel Palestine.
Wow.
It is a transition plan that is designed to replace the failed Oslo process, to solve the problem of Israel, prioritizing ending the crimes of apartheid and occupation before addressing issues of governance, creating a democratic populace in a transitional government that can then choose whether they want to be a one-state or two-state or confederation or binational. But our argument is that first you have to solve the crimes. First you have to end the crimes of occupation and apartheid. Those are not subjects of negotiation. Those are not, ending those crimes can't be conditioned on anything Palestinians do or don't do. They are crimes that have to end, as the International Court of Justice has provided. And so we then establish a transitional government that will undo the edifice of occupation and infrastructure and occupation and apartheid, to create a process where the people between the river and the sea can democratically then decide how they wish to be governed. I think the mistake of the Oslo process and all of the failed peace efforts over the past decades is that they've prioritized this issue of governance and statehood ahead of solving the crimes.
Yes.
So we want to flip that order. And we also want to make the decision-making about how the people between the river and the sea are governed an absolutely democratic one, as opposed to this fictional notion of having unelected, incredible representatives for Palestinians under the so-called PA to decide on behalf of Palestinians how they should be governed, or the criminals currently ruling the apartheid state to decide how the people between the river and the sea should be governed. The goal of the book is really to show that it is possible to deconstruct this, that there is an off-ramp for Israel, that there is a peaceful and democratic transition that respects the rights of all of the people between the river and the sea. And we hope provides the international community with a tool to know what can come out of sanctions, what can come out of an arms embargo, what can come out of increased efforts to persuade, pressure, or punish the Israeli government into ending its crimes by offering up this transitional plan.
I want to move a little bit to the impact you think this is having on the Middle East and North Africa, which is where Dawn really does a lot of its work. Specifically, what the impact you think of Israel sort of killing with impunity over the past 19 months will have on press freedom. I'm speaking specifically on its killing of more than 200 journalists, will have on press freedom in the region. Mm-hmm. How are other world leaders in that region reacting?
I mean, press freedom is pretty dismal in the region already, particularly in Arab states and Iran. I would say there is virtually nowhere in the region that has actual press freedom. You know, for a moment we had some press freedom in Tunisia. We have spots of press freedom on select issues in Lebanon. But that's about it. There really is no press freedom. I think that the impact of Israeli atrocities in Gaza has been multiple-fold in the region. First off, it has undone this fiction that a number of Arab states were very keen to promote, that the Palestine issue is dead, no one cares about Palestinians, we're just going to normalize with Israel and cut our business deals, and we can do that because who cares about Palestinians? They're just going to wish them away. And I think October 7 and everything that's followed exploded that myth, so that now everyone in the Arab world understands what is at stake, what is happening. And the publics of the Arab world, I think, have made clear that they reject this, and they reject their own governments siding with Israel. And I think that's why you've seen a complete kibosh on Saudi Arabia moving forward with normalizing with Israel, notwithstanding the golden carrot that the United States was dangling, which is a treaty-level security agreement from the United States. The other thing, however, is that it has really just erased the issue of discussion of democracy and rights in the Middle East itself. Because the benchmark of what a government can do to people under its control has really gone so much deeper into actual extermination that, for people in Saudi Arabia or people in Egypt, it's almost like a warning. It's like, well, if Israel can get away with this, maybe we can too. So you guys better just zip your lips and bow your heads and kiss the ring. And for organizations like ours and others who want to talk about democracy and human rights in the Middle East, it feels like a luxury. It feels like a distraction from what has to be the principal focus of everyone, the urgent emergency of saving the Palestinian people from complete extermination. So it downgrades and covers and smothers the issues of democracy and human rights, as sort of a decadent side pursuit in the face of what's happening there. So in a way, it's also reverting to what was, before the Arab uprisings, the notion that people only were, the local people in Egypt or Bahrain or whatever, it was just Palestine, 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 imperialism, imperialism. Well, the Arab uprisings were not about that. They were about their own tyranny, the dictatorships they lived under. And, well, those failed, and we're now back to talking about Palestine, 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 with no room for anyone to talk about the destruction of democracy in Tunisia and the coup regime there, the destruction of democracy in Egypt, the destruction of democracy in Yemen. I mean, these were all happening. And if we had one Arab democracy, one true Arab democracy, I think it could be a game changer. And frankly, if we had democracies in the Middle East, I don't believe we would be seeing the genocide in Gaza today.
It feels effectively sort of tone deaf to even be looking at that in the climate that we're in right now. I wanted to ask you about the legal tools and what you think is right now one of the most underutilized legal tools that can be used to get accountability for Israel's actions. Where do you think people need to be focusing on?
Fortunately, there's a menu of things, and we lay them out in our paper in terms of state action, but also there's civil society action, continued focus on the International Criminal Court, continued support for the court for its prosecution, continued submissions of evidence of Israeli war crimes is, I think, very significant because, in I believe it was December 2023, we submitted 43 Israeli soldiers, commanders, officials, basically part of the IDF apparatus in Gaza that were responsible for war crimes. I mean, their names, their pictures, their details. One hopes that that has a chilling effect, but also significantly, it opens up space for universal jurisdiction prosecutions in states, not just in Western Europe, but parts of Latin America, where individual prosecutions can be brought by civil society, but also by victims. And I think those are a very important opportunity. There are a number of cases still pending, particularly of foreign nationals who served in the Israeli military and have returned home. Those are very important tools to put a damper on Israeli soldiers to understand the consequences to them individually. There is the BDS movement, and we should all continue to support support that in terms of individual actions to boycott, divest, and support sanctions on Israel. But there is also the importance of continuing to speak out in our own countries, because, as we all know, a number of governments are now taking steps to exercise repression on behalf of Israel, to silence protesters, to sanction students and academics and journalists and writers for talking about Palestine. There's a bill now in Congress that even wants to criminalize the term Free Palestine. I mean, it's just crazy. So these are all important things to challenge. And I always say to people, even if you don't care about Palestine, even if you don't care about Israel, even if you don't even know where they are on the map, you have to care about your own civil rights and your own freedoms. And I think the Trump administration is making that clear, where they used the so-called fraudulent claim of anti-Semitism in university campuses as the Trojan horse to attack them. And now they're going after them for everything to do with diversity and equity and inclusion as well. And I think some of the liberal Zionists who allowed these Trojan horses to enter the university campuses because of their own hypocritical support for Israel, for based on their Zionist sentiments, are, I hope, understanding that it's not going to end with Israel and Palestine, and even things they support and believe in are now under attack. I mean, the disservice that the boards of Harvard and Penn and Columbia and MIT have done to American academia in terms of undermining academic freedom and the independence of our universities, it's unbelievable. If I were involved in electing and appointing these boards, I would get rid of all of them, because
It's
have
pretty
caused
unprecedented,
so
isn't it?
much damage to the
Yeah.
institutions they're supposed to be protecting and defending. I mean, Bill Ackman, honestly, still has a voice at Harvard. I mean, it just doesn't make sense.
I saw that New York State, the state you're in today, adopted the IRA definition of anti-Semitism also. Yeah.
The problem that we have to confront in the United States, and I say this as as a human rights advocate, is to challenge the corruption that is increasingly exposed in our own government, where I think more and more Americans are realizing that when it comes to foreign policy, particularly foreign policy with respect to Israel, our country's not a democracy. It's an autocracy. It is controlled by billionaire donor oligarchs who have declared their support for the genocidal state of Israel as their number one priority. And the campaign finance system that we have that allows them to buy foreign policy decisions in their favor. If we don't de-link the corruption in our own government that allows them to buy U.S. policy, despite the fact that a strong majority of Americans now opposes what Israel's doing in Gaza, opposes the apartheid rule, believes Israel is an apartheid state. Despite that, that they are still continuing to provide this support to Israel. We can't really challenge that with democratic tools unless we challenge the corruption within our own government. I think that that was the even more heightened reveal in that what we saw in terms of President Trump's shifts and pivots in the Middle East, tied to his recent trip to Saudi Arabia, where he made some decisions independent of Israel, such as declaring diplomacy, an effort to have a diplomatic agreement with Iran, ending the attacks on the Houthis in an agreement with them not to attack only U.S. ships, negotiating directly with Hamas for the release of a prisoner. Those efforts at decoupling U.S. policy in the Middle East from Israel is a very important move, is a very positive development in U.S. interest. But I suspect that it had more to do with the fact that the Arab petrodollar regimes basically outspent AIPAC. And that Trump said, hey, you know, this is worth more to me, Miriam, than your 100 million, because I got $1 trillion from these guys.
That's Miriam Adelson, yeah. Yeah. Is there anything that I haven't asked you that you'd like to impress upon? Or that you think people really should be looking at right now, or should keep top of mind as we watch this slow drip genocide continue?
Well, I mean, just I would say, you know, that this is a great opportunity. It's not just a tragedy. The volatility that has been created, the public protest that has emerged, the shift in global public sentiment against Israel has created an opportunity. And this is not the time to slow down or feel exhausted or feel dejected or, oh, look, we've been protesting, but still the genocide is happening. No. This is a moment when we need to exercise our collective global muscle to push a tipping point. A tipping point is within reach. Millions of Israelis do not want to be global pariahs. They will not accept global isolation. We can reach a peaceful diplomatic solution to end this. It is possible, but it's on us. And this is really a test of democracy where it remains. You know, we are called upon as citizens to end our complacency, to end our taking our own democracy for granted, because what's at stake now isn't just about Israel-Palestine. It's about our own rights and freedoms. It's about whether we are going to submit to government repression in terms of what we say and what we think. So the stakes are much, much higher. This is really just a sort of an appeal for people to stay at it, keep speaking out, keep fighting, because the reason their gloves are coming off is because the global community has been effective. It's not a time to duck out.
Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate you joining me.
You're very welcome.
I hope you'll come back when your book is released.
I hope so. That would be great.
Thank you.
All right.